You don't look like you belong in this neighborhood.
No worries.
I got a call for a suspicious person on this property, and that could be you.
I just walked out from my own
I don't
house.
believe it. People break into places like this all the time, and you're not adding up.
You're making a serious mistake. I'm a federal judge. Do you have a warrant?
I don't need it. Show me your hands now.
The security camera mounted above the garage had been installed for peace of mind, not for history. It was a fixed, wide-angle lens with a faint fisheye distortion, always on, always silent, always indifferent. It recorded everything the same way: delivery drivers, kids playing in the driveway, neighbors waving as they passed. On that quiet weekday morning, it recorded something else entirely. Judge Sarah Jenkins stepped out of her front door first, keys in her right hand, purse tucked under her arm, already mentally running through the day ahead. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone whose life ran on schedules that didn't forgive lateness. Behind her came her children. Marcus, 9 years old, backpack slung over one shoulder, and Zoe, 7, gripping a pink backpack nearly as big as she was. They paused at the edge of the driveway while their mother locked the door. Nothing about the scene was suspicious. The driveway was clean. The SUV parked neatly. The lawn was trimmed. The house, a modest but well-kept suburban home, looked exactly like every other house on the street. If you froze the footage right there, it was the picture of ordinary life. A mother, 2 kids, a school morning. Then the patrol car entered the frame. It rolled in slowly from the right side of the screen, tires crunching softly against concrete as it stopped halfway across the driveway, blocking the SUV. The security camera captured the moment with brutal neutrality. No dramatic angles. No zoom. Just the facts. The driver's door opened. Officer Daniel Kovac, white, mid-30s, broad-shouldered, stepped out with purpose. Not caution, not curiosity. Purpose. His posture was rigid, chin slightly lifted, one hand already resting near his belt. He didn't scan the house. He didn't glance at the kids. His eyes locked immediately on Judge Jenkins. From the camera's perspective, you could see her turn, confusion crossing her face for just a split second before composure took over. She was used to authority, used to confrontation, used to people questioning her decisions in courtrooms far more hostile than a quiet driveway. "Can I help you?" she asked. The officer didn't answer that question. "You don't look like you live around here," he said instead, his voice sharp enough that even without audio enhancement, the intent was unmistakable. Judge Jenkins paused. She gestured lightly toward the house behind her, a calm, explanatory motion. "I just stepped out of my own house. This is my driveway." The officer didn't even glance back at the front door. "I got a call about something suspicious on this property," he replied. "And you fit the description." From the security camera, you could see Marcus shift closer to his sister. Zoe looked up at her mother, confused, her small hand tightening around her backpack strap. Children recognize tone long before they understand words. "Officer," Judge Jenkins said evenly, "we're leaving for school. If there's an issue, you can speak to me, but this is my home." "I don't believe you," Kovac said flatly. That was the moment everything changed. Not escalation, not resistance, disbelief. On the recording, you could see Judge Jenkins straighten slightly, not in anger, but in recognition. She understood what that sentence meant. It wasn't about a call. It wasn't about suspicion. It was about who he thought should live there. "I don't believe you," he repeated. "People break into places like this all the time, and you're not adding up." The phrase "places like this" hung in the air. The camera caught the stillness that followed. A stillness broken only by Zoe's small voice asking, "Mom?" Judge Jenkins took a slow breath. She kept her hands visible, her posture controlled. "You're making a serious mistake," she said. "I'm a federal judge. Do you have a warrant or probable cause to detain me on my own property?" Kovac laughed. Not loudly, just enough. "I don't need a warrant when someone's acting suspicious," he said. "Turn around. You're being arrested." If you're watching this right now, pause for a second and ask yourself where you're watching from. Because moments like this don't feel abstract when you realize they happen in neighborhoods just like yours. And if stories exposing abuse of power matter to you, make sure you're supporting the channel by liking and subscribing. Accountability only works when people keep watching. From the camera's fixed angle, you could see the exact instant Judge Jenkins realized he was serious. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't move. "I am not turning around," she said. "You have no legal authority to arrest me. My children are present." That didn't matter to him. Kovac stepped forward, closing the distance. His body now blocked part of the frame, his back to the camera as he reached for her arm. Marcus cried out. Zoe froze. Don't touch me, Judge Jenkins said, her voice sharper now. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights. The officer grabbed her wrist anyway. The security camera captured it all. No shake, no blur, no mercy. Just a white officer yanking a black woman's arm behind her back in her own driveway, while two children watched. Marcus started crying openly now, stepping forward before stopping, unsure whether he was allowed to move. Zoe screamed her mother's name. It's okay, Judge Jenkins said instinctively, even as the officer forced her hands behind her. Stay where you are. It's okay. It wasn't okay. Metal cuffs closed around her wrists. The click was visible in the way her shoulders flinched, even if the sound wasn't clear on the recording. Kovac announced the charge loudly, almost performatively. Trespassing, he said. Disorderly conduct. On her own property. In front of her children. Without a warrant. Without probable cause. Without shame. Judge Sarah Jenkins was not a random civilian. She was a federal judge for the Northern District, appointed after nearly 2 decades as a prosecutor. She had built her career on constitutional law, on civil rights, and on holding authority to account. She had sent corrupt officials to prison. She had written opinions cited across the country. And none of that mattered in that driveway. The security camera showed the nanny, Patricia, bursting through the front door, panic written across her face as she took in the scene. Neighbors began to appear at the edges of the frame, doors opening, heads turning. This is Judge Jenkins, someone shouted from off-camera. Kovac didn't stop. He guided her toward the patrol car, one hand gripping her upper arm, the other pushing her head down as he opened the back door. The gesture was automatic, dehumanizing, reserved for criminals. The camera caught her being placed into the back seat at 7:12 and 3 seconds a.m. 7 minutes. That was all it took. 7 minutes from locking her door to being arrested. 7 minutes from a normal school morning to a constitutional violation that would cost a city millions. Marcus collapsed onto the driveway, sobbing. Zoe clung to Patricia, shaking. The patrol car pulled away, exiting the frame exactly as it had entered, slow, deliberate, unbothered. The driveway was empty again, but nothing was normal anymore. What Officer Kovac didn't know, what he couldn't see from that narrow lens of bias, was that every second of that encounter had been recorded, not by his body cam alone, but by the unblinking eye of a security camera that would soon be played on every major network in the country. And when the truth came out, this wouldn't just end with charges dropped. It would end with a lawsuit, a federal civil rights case, and a settlement that would leave taxpayers paying the price for one officer's refusal to believe that a black woman could belong. Stay with the story, because what happens next exposes not just one man, but an entire system that protected him until it couldn't anymore. The security camera never followed the patrol car as it left the driveway, but its absence said everything. The wide frame remained fixed on an empty stretch of concrete where a family had stood minutes earlier, now reduced to scattered backpacks, dropped car keys, and 2 children sobbing in the arms of a terrified nanny. The timestamp continued counting forward, indifferent to the damage already done. Inside the patrol car, Judge Sarah Jenkins sat upright in the back seat, wrists bound tightly behind her, the plastic divider inches from her knees. Her breathing was controlled, deliberate, the kind of steady rhythm she had learned to maintain in courtrooms when emotions threatened to overwhelm logic. She knew panic wouldn't help. She knew anger wouldn't either. What she also knew, deeply, precisely, was that nothing about this arrest was legal. Officer Daniel Kovac didn't speak as he drove. His jaw was clenched, eyes fixed forward, one hand gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint crackle of the radio and the hum of tires against asphalt. From the outside, it looked routine. From the inside, it was anything but. At 7:18 a.m., dispatch came through again, asking for confirmation of the arrest details. Kovac responded curtly, repeating the same hollow charges he'd announced in the driveway. Trespassing, disorderly conduct, failure to cooperate. Each word was another layer of fiction added to justify a decision already made. Judge Jenkins listened carefully. She didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She was already cataloging everything. Timestamps, phrasing, inconsistencies, mentally preserving evidence the way she had taught juries to do for years. By the time they reached the station, word had already begun to spread. The suburban police department was small enough that unusual arrests traveled fast. A black woman in professional attire, handcuffed during morning school hours, escorted through the front entrance instead of the side. Officers noticed. Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Someone whispered her name, recognition dawning too late. Kovac ignored it all. He walked her inside with the same rigid confidence he displayed earlier, signing intake forms with quick, impatient strokes. The desk sergeant glanced up, then down, then back up again, confusion flickering across his face. "Name?" the sergeant asked. "Sarah Jenkins," Kovac replied. The pen stopped moving. The sergeant looked at her more closely now. The composed posture, the calm expression, the unmistakable presence of someone used to command. He hesitated. "You said, Sarah Jenkins?" "Yes," she answered before Kovac could. "Federal judge, Northern District. Badge number 4172 arrested me without a warrant on my own property." The room went quiet. That kind of quiet doesn't happen often in police stations. It's not loud or dramatic. It's the sudden absence of sound when everyone realizes something has gone very wrong. Kovac stiffened. "She's lying," he said quickly. She claimed that back at the scene too. Judge Jenkins turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. "Everything you've done is on camera," she said calmly. "Including the moment you said you didn't believe I lived in my own home." The sergeant cleared his throat. "Let me make a call." That call changed everything. While Kovac was instructed to wait, Judge Jenkins was escorted, not to a holding cell, but to a small interview room. Her cuffs remained on, a deliberate choice that would later be scrutinized in court filings and depositions. The camera in the corner of the room recorded her sitting alone, back straight, eyes forward, the picture of restraint. Outside that room, the department scrambled. A supervisor arrived. Then another. Phones rang. Screens were pulled up. Someone accessed the federal judiciary database. A name appeared. A photo. Confirmation undeniable and immediate. By 7:41 a.m., the police chief had been notified. By 7:52 a.m., city legal counsel was on the line. And by 8:03 a.m., federal agents were already en route. Back at the Jenkins home, the damage continued to unfold in quieter ways. Patricia sat at the kitchen table with Marcus and Zoe, both children still shaking, unable to understand why their mother hadn't come back. The security camera footage had already been downloaded, copied, backed up. Patricia had sent it to Judge Jenkins' personal attorney with a single message. They arrested her in front of the kids. Everything is on camera. Neighbors gathered in hushed clusters outside. Phones were out. Someone recognized the patrol car number. Someone else recognized the officer. Another neighbor began recording on their own device, capturing the aftermath, the crying children, the empty driveway, the unmistakable sense of injustice. If you're still watching right now, take a second to hit like on this video. Stories like this don't stay buried unless people look away, and engagement is what keeps the truth from being ignored. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling us what stood out to you most so far, because the next part only gets darker. At the station, Judge Jenkins finally had her cuffs removed, but not by Kovac. A federal agent did it. The door to the interview room opened, and two agents stepped inside with authority that didn't need to be announced. One of them addressed her immediately. "Your Honor." "I'm sorry," he said. "You're free to go. We're documenting everything." Kovac stood in the hallway, watching as the reality of his actions settled in. The confidence he'd carried earlier had drained from his face, replaced by something closer to calculation. He wasn't apologetic. He was afraid. Judge Jenkins stood, flexing her wrists where red marks had already begun to bloom into bruises. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She simply spoke. "I want every report preserved," she said. "Every second of footage. Every communication. This does not disappear." The agents nodded. By the time she returned home, it was late morning. Marcus ran to her first, wrapping his arms around her waist, sobbing. Zoe followed, clinging tightly, terrified she might be taken away again. Judge Jenkins knelt between them, holding both children, whispering reassurances she barely felt herself. The security camera captured that moment too. Within hours, the footage was no longer private. A local news station aired the video that afternoon, blurred faces at first, cautious language accompanying the visuals. By evening, the unedited footage was circulating online, shared millions of times across platforms. The narrative was unavoidable. A black federal judge was arrested in her own driveway because a white officer didn't believe she belonged there. Public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Civil rights organizations demanded answers. Legal scholars dissected the arrest frame by frame, pointing out violations so blatant they bordered on recklessness. Commentators asked the same question over and over again. If this could happen to a federal judge, what happens to people without power? The department placed Officer Kovac on administrative leave that same night. His badge and firearm were confiscated. His name was quietly removed from the active roster. The city released a brief statement expressing concern and promising a full investigation. It wasn't enough. Judge Jenkins filed a federal civil rights lawsuit within days. The complaint named Kovac individually, the police department, and the city itself. It cited unlawful detention, false arrest, racial profiling, emotional distress to minors, and violations of both the 4th and 14th Amendments. The monetary demand was staggering, $6.2 million, a figure carefully calculated to reflect not just damages, but deterrence. Behind closed doors, city officials panicked. Legal counsel warned them the case was indefensible. The security camera footage alone was damning. The officer's own words, captured clearly, left no room for interpretation. There was no ambiguity, no gray area, no plausible defense. And as discovery began, things only got worse. Internal records surfaced showing Kovac had been the subject of multiple prior complaints, all dismissed, all following the same pattern. Aggressive stops, escalation without cause, racial bias documented and ignored. The system had protected him, until it couldn't. As pressure mounted, sponsors pulled support from the department. The mayor faced questions he couldn't dodge. Protesters gathered outside City Hall, holding signs with still frames from the security footage, timestamps burned into memory. The city knew what was coming. A settlement wasn't a matter of if, but when. And when it arrived, it would be paid not just in dollars, but in careers, reputations, and public trust that might never fully recover. Stay with us, because in the final part, the truth comes out in full, the consequences land hard, and the price of one officer's racism is finally counted in public. By the time the city agreed to mediation, the outcome was no longer uncertain. It was inevitable. The security camera footage had become impossible to contain. National networks replayed it in slow motion, freezing on the exact moments that mattered most. The officer blocking the driveway, the dismissive wave of his hand when Judge Jenkins asked about a warrant, the physical grab in front of two children who clearly did not understand why their mother was suddenly being treated like a criminal. Legal analysts didn't argue about interpretation. They explained the consequences. This isn't a gray area, one constitutional law professor said on air. This is a textbook Fourth Amendment violation. Discovery only made things worse. Internal department emails revealed that Officer Daniel Kovac had been flagged repeatedly over the years. 9 prior complaints. Every single one closed. No discipline. No retraining. No pattern officially acknowledged, despite the language in those complaints mirroring what millions were now watching unfold on screen. Aggressive tone. Immediate escalation. Suspicion based on appearance rather than behavior. The city's attorneys knew exactly what a jury would do with that information. Judge Jenkins' legal team moved methodically, filing motions that left no room for procedural delay. Depositions were scheduled. Supervisors were questioned under oath. The desk sergeant admitted that the moment he heard her name, he knew the arrest was indefensible. Dispatch logs confirmed there had been no report of a break-in. Only a vague call about a black woman acting suspicious. That phrase appeared again and again in filings, highlighted, enlarged, impossible to defend. Officer Kovac testified near the end. He sat rigid at the table, hands clasped, eyes avoiding the screens as his own words played back to him. When asked why he arrested Judge Jenkins, he repeated the same line he had used since day one. She didn't look like she belonged there. The room went silent. That sentence, spoken under oath, ended his career. Within 48 hours, the city requested settlement talks, not because they wanted to avoid embarrassment, but because the exposure was catastrophic. Trial would mean weeks of testimony, millions more spent in defense, and an outcome that would almost certainly exceed any negotiated figure. The agreement was announced quietly on a Friday afternoon. The city would pay $6.2 million to Judge Sarah Jenkins and her children. The statement called it a resolution. The public called it accountability. Taxpayers called it expensive. Civil rights advocates called it overdue. Officer Daniel Kovac was terminated immediately. His certification was revoked. An internal review stripped him of pension eligibility due to misconduct. The district attorney announced that criminal charges were under consideration for false arrest and civil rights violations. Whether those charges would ultimately move forward became secondary. His name was now a permanent record. Judge Jenkins never returned to that driveway without remembering the sound of handcuffs closing. But she noticed something else too. Neighbors who waved longer. Parents at school who spoke softly to her children. People who understood that what happened to her was not about status. It was about survival in a system that too often acted first and justified later. In a brief statement, she said only this: "If this can happen to a federal judge, imagine how often it happens to people without cameras, lawyers, or titles." The security camera still hangs above the garage. Still recording. Still silent. Still unblinking. And this time, it did exactly what accountability requires. It told the truth. Before you go, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Stories like this only force change when they're seen, shared, and remembered.